name is Lindsay Painter, and I am privileged to be here today with Steve Allred, who is going to share a little bit about his ministry and passion with us. Steve, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Lindsay. Good to be here. Yes, my name's Steve Allred. I am an attorney, and I practice here in Northern California. Some of the areas I'm passionate about are social justice issues, civil rights, that type of thing, and how that kind of meshes with my legal practice and religious liberty issues. So, yeah, I mean, I could talk about a lot more, but that's I guess a synopsis of some of the things I'm interested in.
And my first question for you is, you used to be a pastor. You actually conducted my grandfather's funeral a few years ago. So can you tell us a little bit about what drew you to pastoral work, even though you had a law degree at the time?
So it was actually kind of the other way around. I began as a pastor and I never thought I would become a lawyer. That was not on the horizon for me, really. And so I had actually gone to seminary and come back to California to work as a youth pastor. And I was kind of, at the time I was single and thought, hey, this is a great time to, like, if I'm going to do any more schooling, let's get it done now, why not? And I just kind of had an interest in, the areas I just talked about, like, religious liberty and civil rights and that type of thing. And so I checked out a couple of different programs, PhD type stuff. And then I was like, hey, what about a JD, Juris Doctor? And so there was a law school in the city where I was pastoring that offered a part-time program. I did that on the side while pastoring, not probably something I'd advise people to do because I was burning the candle at both ends. But so then I ended up pastoring after I finished law school, and I took a couple months off to study for the bar, did that. And I continued pastoring for another 4 years after that. And then eventually when my wife and I had our second child, we decided, I kind of wanted to practice law. So there was something about that. I was like, I want to get some experience. And then also it was a good time because the conference here, the Adventist conference, had asked me if I wanted to do some work with their estate planning, gift, trust, property management department. And so kind of a confluence of different things came together. We're like, it'll be a little more flexible than pastoring, get some experience here. And then from that, I've done other things as well with it, including working with the Church State Council, which is the Pacific Union's religious liberty ministry.
Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of law you practice and where are you practicing?
Yeah, so I'm doing a lot of estate planning, trust, probate, wills, that type of thing. Not super exciting to most people, but it is where we're at right now. We have young kids and we really want to prioritize them. My wife works a couple of days a week as a physician. It's really kind of her calling and passion. So I feel like I want to support that. And so wills and trust is nice because it's not super demanding as far as your schedule, like litigation is and that type of thing. I am in court a little bit with probate, but anyway, so it gives us some flexibility. And we live up in Auburn, which is here in Northern California, and I practice in Roseville. I have an office here.
Let's transition into talking a little bit about your interest in social justice. So I'm very interested in hearing how the intersection of your work with the justice system and your experience in pastoral ministry has influenced your view on that topic.
Yeah, that's probably, a longer answer than you would want to hear. There's so many things, right, that can go into kind of influencing how you think about things. I do think back to when I was working as a pastor in Yuba City, California, where I pastored before I stepped down from pastoring. And, I remember a situation where I had a Black church member he was a little bit older gentleman, had younger, like a second family, younger kids. He was taking his kids one morning to Pathfinder Camporee, and it was 4 a.m. and he was driving to the church parking lot, dark outside, and the county sheriff would customarily come and park there at night and do whatever they, listen to the radio or whatever they do, just listen for the dispatcher, And so they were there, which is fine. And we invited them to come. But anyway, they apparently ran his license plate, and he had some suspended license for not paying some fine, back in the day. And so they arrested him there in front of all of the Pathfinder kids, including his kid. extremely embarrassing to him and his son, who's going, with all his friends on camporee, for nothing other than a non-payment of a fine, essentially. That's just one story. I realize it's anecdotal, but if you look at our system, that's not uncommon, that the poor oftentimes are treated differently because of their lack of funds, their lack of power. Really is what it is. Money equals power a lot of times in society. There's different types of capital, right? You have financial capital, you have political capital, you have all these different types. But so there have been things like that, I think, that have it's kind of made me feel like this is something that Christians, followers of Christ, ought to care about. I mean, there's so many other things I could share too. I think, just being a citizen of this country, like, you are, Lindsay, we live here, we watch the news, you hear what's going on, and you want to do something about the injustices that you see in society, right? So I think that has also influenced me just to feel like, as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, how do I, fulfill God's command to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God, to defend the fatherless, and speak up for the orphan and the widow. And what does that look like? Well, I think Jesus tells us in Luke 4, he says, listen, his mission, he comes to the synagogue at Nazareth. He says, I came to set the oppressed free. I came to bring good news to the poor. I mean, these are things we don't really talk about a lot in American Christianity, at least in some segments. So yeah, I just, all of those things and so many more, I think, have kind of influenced me to feel like this is something Christians ought to care about.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. You have written a book on the subject. I'm fortunate to have a copy of my very own. It's called Do Justice, The Case for Biblical Social Justice. So I am interested in this book. I kind of flipped through it. I haven't had a time to read it yet, but it's really interesting. It has a chapter for several different topics and Bible verses in there. It's Adventist specific. And at the end of each chapter, there's like an action principle for everyone to work on in order to bring more justice into the world. So tell me more about the book and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, I'll start with what inspired me to write it. Like I mentioned earlier, it's been something I've been growing in. I can look back to maybe 15 years ago or so. I'm trying to think when, 12 to 15 years ago. And I remember this topic, well, the issue of racial justice, I didn't really care about that much. I'll just be honest. I was like, pardon me for those who are listening and think, man, this guy's a jerk. But this is how I used to feel. I would be like, why do they have Black History Month? Why do we need this? And I would kind of make fun of that concept almost. Then I started reading some books. And one of the books I read was about, actually the movie 12 Years a Slave was based off of the memoir of Solomon Northup, right? And so I remember reading the actual, book that he wrote, thinking, man, this is crazy. Because you grow up in our education system or however you get information as a kid here in America, and you don't learn a lot about our history, I think. I mean, look what's happening right now in our country with this whole debate over critical race theory, right? Anyway, we could get into that. People don't even know what that is. But the fact is that we don't really learn much, I think, about our history that has happened here. And so anyway, I started to read. And also, I think with the whole incident with George Floyd being murdered as the policeman, knelt on his neck for 8-9 minutes. And for me, and then I started to hear Christians out there saying things that I felt like were just completely contrary to the scriptures. And then as Adventists, even what we see like in some of our church like beliefs and what our pioneers, thought and taught about these things. And I'm like, dude, people are ignorant, I feel like, of just some basic biblical principles. And so for me, that's what led me to say, you know what, there's got to be some voices out there with a different narrative, a different view that I feel like is faithful, more faithful to, scripture and the principles I see there, as well as what our founders as Adventists believe. So yeah, the book is very Adventist specific in the sense that I quote a lot from Ellen White. But I have, it's not meant to be just for Adventists in the sense that I don't take her as the authority so much as just saying, here's what she thought. And really does, I think, make sense with scripture as well. So yeah, that was really kind of the impetus to say in 2020 to sit down and say, I've got to compile some things. I'd written some articles here and there, and I kind of just took some of that and distilled it down to this, because I really felt like there needed to be a resource for Adventists, and I felt like there were a lot of voices out there saying things that just were plain contrary to the principles of scripture and talking about this area. I mean, if God doesn't care about justice in society, then I think we've got the whole, what are we doing here? And I think you can boil it all down to what Jesus says in Matthew 7, verse 12. He says, basically, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Wow. I mean, that's deep. I had not really thought about that verse until the last 3 or 4 years of my life. You read it and you're kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. And I realized this is profound. Jesus is telling us that how we treat each other is the essence of what it means to live a Christian life. That's the essence. And so if we are, Ellen White would say in her Thoughts from the Mount of Blessings book, she has this quote, I think I quote it in here somewhere. And she basically says, listen, let me just share a little bit. She says, a religion that would lead us to be careless of human needs, sufferings, or rights is a spurious religion, a false religion.
Wow.
You can't be a follower of Christ. You can't say you're a Christian and not care about people's rights. Now, how does that play out in society? I make the argument in the book, listen, I think Christians can fall on both sides of a lot of debates, like the abortion debates and the gay marriage debate, some of these things or whatever. I think you can make arguments, but when it comes to actually how we treat people, no matter where they are on these issues, I think we got to love people and give them freedom and, treat them well. Anyway, we could talk more, but that's kind of a summary of how I decided to write the book. And it basically, we talked about a lot of racial justice in here and a little bit of economic justice. And then I try to kind of bring in the whole concept of, and this is the part where some people who've read the book are like, wait, that totally changes at the end. You're talking about something else in a way. But, my other passion is kind of like religious liberty, separation of church and state type stuff. And so to me, I had to work out in my mind, what is the appropriate role for the church in society when it comes to advocating for public morality, for people to say, let's not be racist. Let's have laws that protect people from hate crimes or whatever. Like, what is the church's role in that? At the same time, saying we don't believe the church should enforce religious laws like Sunday laws or Sabbath laws or whatever. And so I kind of wrestle with that in the last 3 chapters or so.
I think that's a really important piece of it that we don't always think of when we address social justice issues. Thank you so much for being with us. Before we go, where can people get this book?
The best place is just on Amazon. We do have a website for the book also, which is, dojusticebooks.com. You can get it there, but the one on Amazon is actually the most recent. There's been a couple minor updates to it. So that's probably the best place to go. Just on Amazon, you can get it right there. Okay, great. Thank you so much for being with us today, Steve. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up? No, thanks for having me. And, it's been fun to just talk with you, Lindsay.